The sun burned high in the sky like a ball of fire. Its heat pressed down on the land without mercy. The soil had cracked up in deep lines as if the earth itself was in spin. Nothing moved. The wind was dry. It carried just dust instead of cold air. The ponds were empty. No streams, no rivers, only silence and heat. A wooden bucket laid on its side near what was once a pond. Now it was just a hollow patch of dry mud, hard and lifeless things as became. Tom, a young man, stood in the middle of his field, his eyes fixed on the withered crops. What was once green and full of life had turned yellow and dry. He could feel sweat rolling down his forehead, and it wasn't just because of the sun, it was because of his fear. His farm was dying, his hope was dying with it. Slowly, he raised his arm and wiped the sweat from his face. His shirt was damp, his breath was heavy. He walked slowly towards the old riverbed. It had been once their lifeline, full of fresh water. Now, all he saw was deep cracks everywhere. Tom stayed for a long moment, his heart shrinking deeper. He tilted his neck back and looked at the bright sky. There wasn't a single cloud, just an endless sheet of blue that offered no promise of rain. Back in the village, the scene was no better. Around the old well, the villagers had gathered. They stood close together, their faces filled with the same worry that Tom carried. The clothes were dusty, their eyes tired. Nobody spoke much. Words felt useless in a time like this. A strong gust of wind blew by, and with it came a cloud of dust, making people cover their faces. Under the shade of the tree, two small children sat quietly, their hands clutched empty clubs. Their lips were dry and cracked. One of them leaned closer to each other and whispered in a voice so weak it almost faded in the wind. The sound of the word was like a knife in Tom's heart. He turned his face away. He couldn't watch the children suffer like this. He walked back towards his small hut and stood beside a broken clay pot. He stayed it for a long time. His thoughts were racing. What can I do? How do I save my farm? How do I save my family? Then, as he stood there, lost in thought, he heard something, a whisper. Two villagers were talking not far from him. He turned his head slightly and listened. One man pointed towards a house far away, and Tom's heart suddenly leapt. His eyes widened. For the first time in days, there was hope. Without wasting a single second, Tom started walking fast. His feet kicked up, little clouds of dust as he hurried along the road. His heart was loud in his ears. What if he heard was true? Then maybe, just maybe, things would change. Henry's house stood at the far end of the village. It was bigger than most houses and looked cleaner too. In the yard, Henry sat on a wooden chair, slowly waving a fan in front of his face. His posture was relaxed. His face wore a smile that looked a little too proud. Tom walked into the yard with quick steps, but stopped at a respectful distance. He joined his hands politely. Henry looked up, his eyes sharp, and that small smile grew in his face. Tom wasted no time. He spoke with urgency, his voice steady but full of hope. He asked Henry if he could sell the old will on his land. Henry didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned forward in his chair and placed a finger in his chin. He pretended to think. His eyes narrowed as he was planning something. Then slowly, the smile crept back on his face, a smile that hid something. 1,000 coins, Henry said at last, raising a single finger. Tom froze. his eyes widened in shock. 1,000? That's everything I have. For a few seconds, he stood still. His mind screamed at him, but then he remembered his fields. He remembered the child, and Henry's eyes shined as the pouch touched his fingers. His smile turned. He opened the pouch slightly, letting the shine of the coins reflect in his eyes. Then, without delay, he pulled out a piece of paper and wrote in big letters, "This wealth belongs to Tom." Both men signed in it. Henry signed with a grain that said he had outsmarted the world. Tom signed with a hopeful smile, his heart lighter than before. He turned and walked away. The sun shone bright behind him as if blessed his path. For the first time in the days, he felt alive. The dirt road stretched ahead as Tom walked, holding a rope of bucket in his hands. His steps were quick, his eyes were full of excitement. He was finally going to have water. When he reached the old stone well, his heart almost leapt out of his chest. There it was, standing strong and ancient, with green moss clinging in its sides. And inside, yes, there was water. He could see the shrimp deep down. Tom crouched near the edge and tied the rope tightly to the bucket. His hands shook, not from fear, but from joy. Slowly, he lowered the bucket down. The rope slid through his fingers. His ears caught the sweetest sound of the world. Splash! Tom's smile widened. He began pulling the rope back up. His muscles tightened. Sweat ran down his face, but he didn't care. Water drops began to sparkle in the sunlight as the bucket came into the view. It was full, completely full. Tom's hand gripped the bucket tightly. He lifted it with pride, his eyes shining. It was it, the start of a new life. But then a shadow fell over him. Tom turned his head and froze. Henry was standing there. His hands were behind his back, and he had that same proud smile on his face. Behind him, the sunlight was bright, making his shadow look sharp, like something which is very creepy. Tom blinked. "Henry!" His voice shook with surprise. Henry walked closer, so closer and steady, his eyes fixed on the bucket. Then in cold voice he said, "You can't take that water." Tom's mouth fell open. "What? I bought the well." Henry lifted his hand and pointed at the water. "The water is mine." Tom stared at him, his heart beating fast. "How can a well come without water?" Henry folded his arms and stood tall, his chin held high. "Read the paper," he said with a spring. Then, like a villain, he laughed loudly, tilting his neck back. His laugh echoed in the empty air. Tom's hands curled into fists. His teeth clenched. Veins popped on his forehead. He slammed it first on the edge of that well. "No way!" he shouted. Then he turned and stormed off, his steps kicking up dust. His face was burning with anger, but also with determination. Henry stood there, smiling like a man who thought he had won already. The next morning, under the shade of a big tree, the villagers gathered. Sunlight passed through the leaves, making soft patterns on the ground. In the center stood Tom. His voice was strong. His hands moved as he explained everything. His face was red with anger and hope. Henry stood opposite to him, calm, arms crossed, that same fake smile on his face. Tom pointed at him. "He cheated me," he shouted. Henry said, "I sold the well. not the water. The crowd whispered in confusion. Heads turned. Soft voices filled the air. At the back, on a rise in wooden tall chair, sat David, the village head. His face was serious, his eyes thoughtful. Tom's voice grew desperate. Sweat rolled on his face. Henry, however, stood there like a man who thought he had already won. Then the crowd went silent. Everyone turned their heads. David walked forward. His steps were calm, but in his presence was strong. His eyes were sharp and full of wisdom. He raised his hand, and the whispers shut off. Henry, he said softly, but his voice was strong. Is the water yours? Henry smiled proudly and closed his eyes and said, Yes. David's lips curled into a small smile. Then, why is your water inside Tom's well? Henry's eyes flew open. His proud face froze. David stepped closer. His voice was calm, but sharp like a knife. You are using Tom's well without his permission. The villagers shocked. The laughter broke out. It spread through the crowd like a wave. David pointed his hand at Henry. Take your water out, or parent. Henry's face turned red, his mouth opened, but no words came out. David said, Water inside the well belongs to the owner of the well. The villagers nodded. Claps and cheers filled the air. Tom's face lit up with relief. Henry lowered his head. Shadows covered his face. Slowly, he turned and walked away, his pride broken. The sun shone bright again. This time brought hope. Tom stood at his well, pulling up the bucket with a big smile. Drops of water sparkled in the sunlight. He poured the water into a pot and carried it into his fields. He tilted the pot, and the water spread across the dry soil. Slowly, tiny green sprouts pushed through the ground. Life was back. Villagers passed by, smiling and waving at Tom. He waved back, pride shining in his eyes. Far away, Henry stood beside a tree, peeking with an angry look. Shadows covered his face, but Tom didn't care. For him, the world was bright again. And so, in the land that once had no water, hope returned, flowing from a well that once came without water.